The chicken was still on the stove when Kelsey stood up. She didn't tap a glass. She didn't clear her throat. She just stood. And the room responded to her the way rooms always responded to Kelsey. Everything turned toward her, like plants adjusting toward light. She was holding Daniel's hand, and he was already smiling, and before she even said the words, my mother's hand had moved to her chest. "We're engaged." 2 words. The room came apart at the seams in the best possible way. My mother made a sound I hadn't heard from her in years. My aunt knocked her water glass with her elbow and didn't notice. My cousin pulled out her phone. Daniel looked at Kelsey the way people look at something they've decided on completely, and Kelsey accepted the attention the way she always did, gracefully, like she'd been expecting it, like the whole room was simply catching up to something she'd already known. I was seated at the far end of the table. I smiled. I put my fork down. I said, "That's wonderful," and I meant it. I watched my mother lean across 2 people to reach Kelsey's hand, and I watched Daniel field questions he clearly hadn't rehearsed, and I stayed in my seat and let the moment be what it was. My mother looked at me once, just once, across the table while the noise was still high. Her expression was brief and specific. Then she leaned toward me slightly and said, low enough that only I could hear, "Don't make this about you." I hadn't said anything. I hadn't moved. I was still smiling. "I know," I said. She straightened up and turned back toward Kelsey. I finished the water in my glass. Before I go further, please take a moment to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I read more of those than you'd think. Now let me take you back. My name is Alyssa. I'm 34. I work in compliance, which means I spend most of my professional life reading documents carefully, looking for gaps between what something says and what it means. I am not dramatic. I am not reactive. I've been described as hard to read, which I've always taken as a neutral observation about how I process things rather than a comment on whether I feel them. Kelsey is 4 years younger than me. She's 30. She's the kind of person who makes decisions the way other people cross streets. Quickly, confidently, without checking twice. She's charming in the way that makes people feel chosen when she talks to them. She fills space naturally. I've never been jealous of that. I've always thought of it as simply the way she's built, the same way I'm built towards something quieter. Growing up, the dynamic was straightforward. Kelsey was the one you watched. I was the one you consulted later when you needed something organized or explained. My mother never said she had a favorite. She didn't need to. Favoritism that's never spoken out loud is still something you can feel in the architecture of a room. Who gets which kind of attention, where the energy goes when everyone walks in together. I had learned, somewhere around the age of 14, that the cleanest way to exist in that family was to be useful and undemanding. I was good at both. I kept my reactions internal. I asked questions instead of making statements. I became, over the years, someone people trusted with information because I never seemed to do anything disruptive with it. That's not bitterness. That's just the honest description of how I learned to operate. The dinner had been my mother's idea. She'd called it a Sunday gathering, which in our family means anywhere between 7 and 14 people seated around a table that comfortably holds 8, with enough food to suggest it was planned, but enough chaos to suggest it wasn't. Daniel had been coming to these dinners for about 6 months. He was quiet in the way that reads as thoughtful rather than distant. He listened more than he spoke. He always helped clear the table without being asked. I had met him properly for the first time at a barbecue in September. We talked briefly about work. He was in project management, which meant we'd spent about 12 minutes comparing notes on documentation and version control before Kelsey had appeared and redirected the conversation entirely, the way she always did when she wanted to signal that someone was hers. I hadn't thought much about it at the time. After the engagement announcement, the dinner folded into itself the way those events do. Someone found a bottle of Prosecco, questions got asked and half answered, plans got mentioned without being fully formed. I helped clean up. I hugged Kelsey at the end of the night and told her I was happy for her, and I was. She squeezed back in the quick way she has, already half turned toward Daniel, already moving to the next thing. I drove home alone. I went to sleep without thinking about any of it particularly. The text came on a Wednesday evening. I didn't recognize the number. The message was short. It said, "This is Daniel. I'm sorry to contact you this way. I got your number from your mother's contact list. I hope that's okay. I found something that doesn't make sense. Would you be willing to talk?" I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down and finished what I was doing, which was reviewing a quarterly report for work. I came back to it 20 minutes later, read it a third time, and thought about what I knew. What I knew was that the message was specific in a way that casual messages aren't. He hadn't said something felt off. He hadn't asked if I had a minute. He'd said he found something. That phrasing, in my experience, means the person has already done some looking and has arrived at a place they can no longer reason away on their own. I also thought about the fact that he'd gotten my number from my mother's contact list rather than from Kelsey. That detail was quiet, but it was there. I typed back, "I can talk when works for you?" He responded in under 2 minutes. We arranged to meet that Friday. I didn't tell anyone. In the 3 days between his message and our meeting, I did what I always do when something doesn't line up. I paid attention to what was already in front of me. I thought about the engagement timeline. Kelsey and Daniel had been together for just under a year when they announced it. That was fast, but not unusual for Kelsey. She had always moved quickly. She'd moved quickly through apartments, through job changes, through the years she spent deciding what she actually wanted. Fast decisions were her pattern, not an anomaly. What I noticed, though, thinking back more carefully, was a smaller thing. 3 weeks before the dinner, Kelsey had called me on a Sunday afternoon. This was slightly unusual. We were close in the functional sense, the kind of siblings who texted regularly and showed up for the important events. But we didn't often call each other without a specific reason. She had talked for about 40 minutes about nothing in particular, about a work situation that resolved itself mid-conversation, about a friend's wedding she'd just attended, about whether she should repaint her kitchen. At the time, I'd assumed she was just having one of those afternoons where you need someone to talk at. That happened. I hadn't flagged it. Thinking back, what I remembered now was that she'd asked me, around the 30-minute mark, a question that had felt random in the moment. She'd asked if I still had the paperwork from when our grandmother had passed. Specifically, whether I'd kept the letter the estate attorney had sent to the family about the account structure. I'd said yes, I kept everything. She'd said, "Okay, good to know," and moved on to something else. I had filed that away without examining it. I was filing it now. There was another small thing, smaller, but it had stayed with me. At the dinner after the announcement, when the Prosecco was being poured and everyone was still in that first warm wave of excitement, I had been standing near the kitchen doorway. Daniel and my uncle were talking at the far end of the room. My uncle had asked something about the timeline. When are you thinking for the wedding? Where do you want to settle? And Daniel had given a light, easy answer about nothing being decided yet. But there had been a pause before his answer. Not a long pause. A beat, maybe two. The kind of pause that would be invisible in most contexts, and that I had only noticed because I was not in the middle of the celebration. I was at its edge, watching. He had looked at Kelsey first, not in the way of checking in with your partner before answering a joint question. It was more specific than that. It was the look of someone who is verifying that it's safe to say something, or choosing not to say something else. Kelsey had smiled and reached for her glass and said something light about destination weddings being overrated, and the conversation had moved on. 2 seconds, total. I had not thought about it again until Daniel's message arrived. I did not speak to Kelsey in those 3 days. She texted once to share a screenshot of a venue she was already looking at. A manor house upstate, exposed beams, the kind of place that photographs well. I sent back a heart and a comment about the beams, and she responded with a laughing emoji and went quiet. I did not speak to my mother either. I thought about calling her, testing the water, but I decided against it. My mother's instinct, when she sensed disruption on the horizon, was to smooth it before it arrived. If I called and said anything about Daniel reaching out, she would call Kelsey before I'd finish my sentence. That would close the window I hadn't yet walked through. So I stayed quiet. I went to work. I ate lunch at my desk. I slept well because I have trained myself over years not to anticipate outcomes I don't yet have information for. Friday morning, I got dressed in the same way I'd dress for any meeting that required me to listen carefully and say very little. We met at a coffee shop 3 miles from my office. He was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table, 2 coffees already ordered, a leather folder open in front of him that he closed when he saw me walk in. He looked like someone who hadn't slept well, but was determined not to show it. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Of course," I said. I sat down. I left my coat on. I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup and looked at him and waited. He said, "I want to be clear that I'm not here to put you in a difficult position. I'm not asking you to be in the middle of anything." "Okay," I said. He paused. "I found some paperwork that I wasn't expecting to find, and I've been trying to understand it on my own for 4 days, and I can't. And you're the only person in her family who I thought might." Another pause. "Who I thought might give me a straight answer." I didn't say anything. He opened the folder. I looked at the top page. I didn't touch it. I read the first 3 lines. Something in the room shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would have noticed. Just the particular stillness that settles when you realize that whatever you thought the situation was, you were only seeing part of it. I looked up at him. "Walk me through when you first saw this," I said. Daniel had found it by accident. That was the first thing he told me, and I believed him, because the specific kind of accident he described was not the kind people invent. He hadn't been looking through Kelsey's things. He hadn't been suspicious of anything in particular. He'd been helping her move 2 boxes from her storage unit to her apartment. Practical, ordinary, the kind of task that becomes part of a relationship without announcement. And one of the boxes had slipped. Papers had scattered across the concrete floor of the parking garage. He'd gathered them quickly, stacked them without reading them, and only noticed the name on the top sheet when he set the pile on her kitchen counter. The name was Victor Hale. He hadn't recognized it. He'd asked Kelsey who that was, casually, the way you ask about any unfamiliar name on a piece of mail. And she'd said it was nothing, just old financial paperwork from her grandmother's estate, and she'd taken the stack from the counter and put it back in the box without looking at him. He told me he hadn't thought about it again until 3 days later, when he was reviewing the joint account documents Kelsey had asked him to sign. She wanted to open a joint account before the wedding, he said. She said it made sense to start the financial side early. I didn't have a reason to say no. "But," I said, "but the form had a line for existing account transfers. She'd already filled in a number." He turned the folder toward me slightly. I asked her about it, and she said it was just her savings, money she'd been putting away for a few years, which made sense. I didn't push. He paused. "Except then, I was going through my own paperwork that night. I keep a file of all my financial documents, going back about 7 years, and I found a breakdown I'd requested from our bank when we first started talking about buying property together. It listed all accounts she'd disclosed at that point. The number on the joint account form was about $60,000 more than the total she'd disclosed 8 months ago. The coffee shop was quiet around us. Someone near the window was typing. The door opened and closed behind me, letting in a brief pull of cold air. "$60,000, I said. "Give or take." I looked at the folder. "And you connected that back to Victor Hale." "I looked him up," Daniel said. "He's an estate and trust attorney, based about 40 minutes from where your grandmother lived." I sat with that for a moment. "Show me the document from the box," I said. It was a letter, 2 pages, dated 14 months ago. Formal in the way that estate correspondence is always formal, precise language, numbered clauses, the particular rhythm of legal writing that is designed to leave no room for interpretation. I read it carefully. I did not read it quickly. The letter referenced a secondary distribution from my grandmother's estate. Not the primary distribution, the one the family had been informed of, the one my mother had referenced at the time, the one that had been divided and documented and explained. This was a separate line item, a specific account that my grandmother had established independently outside the main estate structure, designated to a single beneficiary. The designated beneficiary was Kelsey. The amount was not small. I set the page down. I thought about the Sunday afternoon phone call 3 weeks before the engagement dinner. Kelsey asking whether I still had the letter from the estate attorney, asking if I'd kept the documentation about the account structure. She hadn't been making conversation. She'd been checking. "Did you know about this?" Daniel asked. "No," I said. It was true. "Did your mother?" I thought about that more carefully before answering. "I don't know." He nodded slowly. "I'm not asking because I think someone did something wrong," he said, and I appreciated that he meant it. "I'm asking because she told me specifically that she had no family inheritance, that anything from that side of the family had gone through your mother years ago and there was nothing left. She said it when we were first talking about buying a place together. It came up because I was explaining my own financial picture and I asked about hers." "When was that conversation?" "About 10 months ago." The letter was dated 14 months ago. The sequence was clean and specific. She had received the letter, she had known about the account, she had told him 4 months later that there was no inheritance, and then, 8 months after that, she had handed him joint account paperwork with a number $60,000 higher than what she'd disclosed. I did not say any of that out loud. I was still organizing it. "There's one more thing," Daniel said. He turned to the second page of his folder. It was a property record, a partial one. He'd pulled it himself from the county registry, he explained, after finding the attorney's name and doing some basic searching. It showed a property transaction from 11 months ago, a small parcel, rural, not far from where our grandmother's house had been. Kelsey's name was on the deed, not Daniel's, not a joint purchase, just Kelsey's name, on a piece of property she had apparently bought 11 months ago and not mentioned to the man she was now engaged to. "I didn't know she owned property," Daniel said. "Neither did I said, and that was true as well. I looked at the record for a long moment. The transaction amount was listed. It was not a large property. The number was modest, rural modest, the kind of price that makes sense for land rather than a structure. But the number was consistent with what someone might spend if they'd recently received a private estate distribution and was quietly beginning to move it into assets." "What does this mean?" Daniel asked. It was a genuine question. He wasn't asking me to draw a conclusion. He was asking whether I could help him understand the shape of what he was looking at. I thought about how to answer that accurately. "It means she had financial resources she didn't tell you about," I said. "It means she used some of those resources to purchase property without mentioning it, and it means the number on the joint account form doesn't represent her full picture." "Why wouldn't she tell me?" I didn't answer that immediately. There are different reasons people omit financial information from the people closest to them. Some of them are protective, a fear of being valued for money rather than for themselves. Some of them are habitual, people who've learned to keep financial things private because that's how they were raised. And some of them are more structural, more deliberate, more specifically chosen. I didn't know which one applied to Kelsey. I knew which one Daniel was afraid of. "I don't know," I said. "I can't answer that for her." He leaned back. "Do you think she's hiding it from me specifically, or do you think this is just how she handles things?" That was the better question. I thought about Kelsey. I thought about the pattern I knew, the fast decisions, the selective transparency, the way she managed situations by moving forward quickly enough that the questions didn't catch up until the momentum was already established. "I think," I said carefully, "that Kelsey sometimes makes decisions and then works backward to make sure everything looks clean. I don't think she sets out to deceive. I think she decides what she wants and then shapes the information around that decision." "That's still a form of deception." "Yes," I said, "it is." We sat there for a while. Daniel asked me twice if I thought he was overreacting, and both times I said the same thing, that I wasn't in a position to tell him whether his reaction was proportionate, only whether the information was accurate. He seemed to find that more useful than reassurance would have been. He asked me about our grandmother's estate more generally, what I remembered about the process, whether it had seemed straightforward at the time. I told him what I knew, which was limited. The main distribution had gone through a standard probate process, handled by the family attorney, divided among the immediate family in a way that had been communicated clearly. I had not known about any secondary account. I had not known Victor Hale's name before today. "Do you think your mother knows?" he asked again. "I think," I said slowly, "that's a question worth sitting with, but I'm not the right person to ask her." He understood what I meant. The thing I did not say was the thing that had been sitting in the back of my mind since I'd read the first page of that letter. My mother. At the dinner table when Kelsey had announced the engagement, the specific way she had looked at me, the quickness of it, not celebratory, not directed at Kelsey, just a brief and pointed look across the table. And then, "Don't make this about you." I had not done anything. I had not moved or spoken. The warning had arrived before any disruption. That timing had always been slightly odd to me. I had filed it without examining it the way I filed things when I didn't yet have the context to understand what they meant. I had the beginning of that context now. It wasn't enough, but it was the first edge of something. "What do I do with this?" Daniel asked. We had been at the table for almost 90 minutes. His coffee was long finished. Mine was cold. "That depends on what you need to know," I said. "I need to know if she's honest with me." "Then you need to ask her directly," I said. "Not about the money, not first. About the property. That's the cleanest place to start, because it's documented and it's recent, and there's no version of it that's an oversight or a miscommunication. You either tell your partner you own property or you don't." He was quiet for a moment. "And if she explains it away?" "Then you ask the next question," I said. "You stay with the facts. You don't let the conversation move faster than your understanding of it." He looked at me. "Has she done this before? Managed information this way with people close to her?" I thought about 14 years of watching Kelsey operate. The job she'd left without mentioning she'd been looking. The apartment she'd signed a lease on before telling anyone she was moving. The boyfriend before Daniel who had learned about a significant decision secondhand through someone else after it had already been made. "She's always moved faster than the people around her," I said. "I don't know if that's intentional or just how she's built. I need to know which one it is before I marry her." "Yes," I said, "you do." He walked me to the corner when we left. We stood on the sidewalk for a moment before going separate directions. He thanked me. I told him he didn't need to thank me, that I hadn't done anything except help him look at what was already in front of him. "There's something else," he said as I was turning to go. I stopped. "In the box of papers, the one that fell, there were other documents underneath the Hale letter. I didn't read them carefully, but one of them had your name on it." I looked at him. "I don't know what it was," he said. "I wasn't trying to read it. I put it back, but I saw your name." I stayed very still. "Alyssa Rowe," he said, confirming. "Your full name, on the second page of something I couldn't identify." I said, "Okay." He said, "I thought you should know." I nodded. I thanked him. I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for 6 minutes without starting the engine. My name, in Kelsey's private papers, documents she kept in storage, not at home, documents she'd retrieved specifically, I now realized, in the weeks before the engagement announcement, documents connected to an estate distribution I had not been told about. I hadn't been left out by accident. The question was why, and whether whatever was in that second page was the reason my mother had looked at me across that dinner table before I had said a single word. I started the car. I had one more conversation to have before I understood the full shape of this. I did not call Kelsey that night. I did not call my mother either. I drove home, made dinner, and sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down everything I knew in the order I had learned it, not to organize a plan, not to prepare for anything, just because that is how I process, by making the shape of something visible on paper where I can look at it without it shifting. What I had was this: a private estate distribution my grandmother had directed specifically to Kelsey 14 months ago that the rest of the family had not been informed about. A property purchase made 11 months ago using what was almost certainly part of that distribution. A financial disclosure to Daniel 10 months ago in which Kelsey had stated she had no family inheritance, joint account paperwork with a number that didn't match what she'd told him, and somewhere in a box in her storage unit, a document with my full name on a page she had not wanted anyone to see. I looked at that list for a long time. Then I turned the page over and wrote one question on the back. What was in the secondary distribution? Not who received it, I already knew that. Not whether Kelsey had handled it honestly with Daniel. That was visible enough now. The question was the contents of the original letter, whether the distribution was a straightforward inheritance, money my grandmother had quietly set aside for her younger granddaughter, or whether it was something else, something structured differently, something that might explain why my name appeared in the paperwork at all. I did not sleep well that night, but I was up by 6, and by 7 I was on the phone with my own attorney. Her name is Patricia Chen. I had worked with her twice before on estate matters. Once when I was named executor for a colleague's small estate, and once when I needed a contract reviewed. She is methodical and direct and does not offer comfort when what you need is information. I had always appreciated that. I explained what I knew without editorializing. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for 4 seconds. I counted. And then she said, "You need to see the full distribution letter, not the copy Daniel found. The original filing." "How do I get that?" "Victor Hale filed it with the probate court when the distribution was made. It's public record. I can request a copy today." "How long?" 2 to 3 days, if the county processes it cleanly." "Do it," I said. She did not ask me if I was sure. I had chosen her specifically because she was not that kind of attorney. Daniel texted me that evening. He said he had spoken to Kelsey. He did not give details in the message, only that it had happened and that he needed a few days to think through what she'd told him. He asked if I was available later in the week if he had more questions. I said yes. I did not ask what she'd said. If he needed me to know, he would tell me when he was ready. The next 2 days were ordinary on the surface. I went to work. I reviewed a compliance audit that needed 3 rounds of corrections. I had lunch with a colleague who talked the entire time about a kitchen renovation, and I listened and offered opinions on cabinet hardware, and the normalcy of it was not grating. It was actually grounding. There is something stabilizing about a world that keeps moving through its own small decisions while you wait for information that matters. My mother called on the second day. I let it go to voicemail. She said she was just checking in, that she'd heard Kelsey was looking at venues, that she wanted to know if I was doing all right. Her voice was careful in the specific way it gets when she is trying to gauge something without asking for it directly. I did not call back that day. Patricia sent the document on a Thursday morning. I opened the email at my desk, read the attached file twice, and then got up, filled my water glass, came back, and read it a 3rd time. The secondary distribution was not a straightforward inheritance. My grandmother had established the account 17 years ago, well before her death, well before any estate planning conversations the family had been part of. It had been funded gradually over time, and it had been designated specifically in her private instructions, but it had not been designated solely to Kelsey. It had been designated jointly. Kelsey's name was listed first. My name was listed second. The account had 2 named beneficiaries. The distribution, per the letter Victor Hale had filed with the court, was to be divided equally between us upon my grandmother's death, with a 60-day window for both parties to be formally notified and to acknowledge receipt. Kelsey had acknowledged receipt 14 months ago. I had not been notified. There was no record in the filing of any attempt to contact me, no certified letter, no email, no phone call logged through the attorney's office. The file contained Kelsey's signed acknowledgement and a notation that the second beneficiary had been, and I am using the exact language from the document, unable to be reached. I had not moved. I had not changed my phone number. I had not been unreachable. My name was on that distribution. Half of what Kelsey had received was supposed to have come to me, and the only reason I had not known was that no one had told me. I sat very still at my desk. Then I picked up the phone and called Patricia back. She had already read the full filing by the time I reached her. She did not need me to explain what I'd seen. "The notation is not legally sufficient," she said. "Unable to be reached requires documented attempts. There are none on file. The distribution was released on the basis of one beneficiary's acknowledgement, which is procedurally irregular." What are my options? You file a claim with the probate court for your portion of the distribution. The account was funded and dispersed. The money exists. Kelsey received it. You are legally entitled to your half. And Hale? He has exposure. Whether he acted negligently or in coordination with your sister, that's something we'd establish through discovery. I thought about the property record Daniel had found, the modest parcel of land purchased 11 months ago. I thought about the $60,000 discrepancy on the joint account form, which had seemed significant when Daniel pointed it out, but which now had a different shape entirely. It was not simply money she hadn't disclosed to him. It was money she had received at my expense. How long does the process take? I asked. Filing is immediate. Resolution depends on whether there's a challenge. If she cooperates and the estate is liquid, it could be straightforward. If she disputes, it becomes litigation. Start the paperwork, I said. I called Daniel that afternoon, not to tell him what I'd found. That was not my information to give him, or not yet. I called because he had been carrying a partial picture for days, and I thought he deserved to know that the picture was larger than either of us had understood at the coffee shop. There's more to it than what we looked at, I said. I can't tell you everything yet because some of it is in the hands of my attorney now, but I want you to know that what you found was real, and it goes further back than the joint account. He was quiet for a moment. Does it involve me directly? No, it involves my grandmother's estate and what Kelsey was supposed to do with it and didn't. Another pause. She told me the property was an investment, something her grandmother had encouraged her to make years ago. The timeline doesn't support that, I said. He said, no, it doesn't. His voice was flat and tired. I've been trying to find a version of this that makes sense, a version where she just handled things privately because she was scared or because she didn't know how to tell me. I keep building it, and it keeps falling apart in the same place. Where does it fall apart? She had months to tell me. She had a dozen natural openings. She didn't take any of them. I didn't say anything. I love her, he said. It was not a defense, it was just true, and he was saying it out loud because sometimes you need to hear yourself acknowledge a thing clearly before you decide what to do with it. I know, I said. That doesn't fix this, does it? No, I said gently. It doesn't. Kelsey called me 4 days later. I was ready for the call. I answered on the third ring. Her voice was composed in the way that required effort. She said she understood I'd spoken to Daniel. She said she wanted to explain. She used the word complicated 3 times in the first 2 minutes. I let her talk. She said that the inheritance had felt like something personal, something between her and our grandmother, that she hadn't known how to share it without it changing things. She said she'd meant to tell me. She said the timing was never right. She said she knew that wasn't good enough. She did not mention the property. She did not mention Daniel's joint account form. She did not say anything about the legal filing or Victor Hale or the notation that I had been unable to be reached. When she was finished, I said, Patricia Chen filed a claim with the probate court on Tuesday. You'll receive formal notice through Hale's office within the week. Silence. That's your right, she said finally. Her voice had shifted into something thinner. Yes, I said, it is. I didn't think you'd... She stopped. What? I said, calm. Still. She didn't finish the sentence. Kelsey, I said, you made a decision, a series of them. I'm not angry, I'm not trying to hurt you, but I'm also not going to step back from something that was legally mine because it's uncomfortable for you now. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Mom doesn't know about the legal filing. She will, I said, when she needs to. There was nothing else to say. We ended the call without resolving anything, which was the honest ending. Some conversations don't close cleanly. They just reach the place where all the available words have been used. My mother called 3 days after that. I answered this time. She did not say, don't make this about you. She asked if we could have lunch. I said yes. She chose a place near her apartment, a small Italian restaurant we'd been going to since I was in my 20s. We sat across from each other and ordered the same things we always ordered, and she told me that she hadn't known about the secondary account, and I looked at her and believed about 80% of it, which was enough for now. She also said, quietly, near the end of lunch, that she should have paid closer attention. She didn't specify to what. She didn't need to. I told her I wasn't asking her to fix anything. I was just moving forward through the process. She nodded. She looked older than she had at the dinner table the night of the engagement announcement. Or maybe I was just seeing her more clearly. Daniel and Kelsey postponed the wedding. That was the last thing I heard through channels that were close enough to reliable. I don't know what their private conversations looked like. I don't know what she told him or what he decided to believe. That was between them, a space I had no business entering and no desire to. The legal matter is still being resolved. These things take time. I am not in a hurry. What I did in the end was very small. I answered a message from someone who needed a straight answer. I helped him look at what was in front of him without telling him what to conclude. I called my attorney. I read a document carefully. I filed a claim for something that was already mine. That was all. I did not confront anyone dramatically. I did not expose anything publicly. I did not ask anyone to choose a side, or validate my experience, or acknowledge the years of Sunday dinners where I sat at the edge of the room and smiled and said the right things and drove home alone. I just stopped making myself smaller than the situation required. Here is what I know now that I did not know clearly before. Silence is not the same as peace. I had confused them for a long time. I had kept quiet in situations that asked me to speak because I had learned early that keeping quiet was how you stayed safe in that particular family. But safety is not the same as being whole. At some point, the cost of staying quiet becomes greater than the cost of being seen, and you have to decide, consciously, with your eyes open, which you are choosing. The other thing I know is this: people who omit things from you are not always lying. But omission, sustained and deliberate, is its own kind of answer. It tells you what someone believes you will do with the truth. It tells you what they think you're worth being told. I was worth being told. So are you. If there's something in your life that doesn't add up, something you've been quietly filing away, telling yourself it's nothing, telling yourself the timing isn't right, I want you to ask yourself one question. Not what it means, not what you'll do about it, just what do you actually know? And what have you only been allowed to see? Drop your answer in the comments. Or don't, but sit with the question. That's where everything starts.